drive through these lines I write. I keep it live cause I thrive. I might just blow your mind tonight. I'm so hyped, but it's no hype. From this height, it's direct hits on sight. I'm your type, lend me your ears to show you that there's something in me. I'm not giving up, I'm standing right here, holding these days hostage. And I'll make this my year. We turning fear into love, and the love's in the air. I love doing this cause nothing compares. Nothing can share that same type of feeling when you feeling them flares. They can't catch it, it's havoc. I rip to a tear, switch a scenario on stereos, I leave them impaired. Variables start to change and they're all in my range. I just gotta grab it, it's all mathematics. Every step is drastic, I make it fantastic. I'm trying to take your breath away. Asthmatic.
This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo.
Yeah, just nod your head with it, so explicit and vivid. Every image is intricate, intimate. I put my all into it, no scrimmage and no rules. I'm a pro tool, hear my heartbeat, beat into the vocals. I'm so loco, lost my mind, oh no. It's ponderoso, dope, so no overdose, cause it's dope, yo. Man, this is house grown, mixed with some milestones. So I let the style flow down like the Dow Jones, bringing it with some foul tones, letting the crowd know we getting loud, so it's eardrum rudiments. Yeah, we bring it rude again. Move, little hooligan. Music for tuning in, full time to the 10. I'm on my clock like I told you. I'm doing this for dreams we pursuing.
It's Monday night and the terrorists are out to get you. My God, I'm just kidding. It's the Anti-Media Radio, once again with your host, Nick Bernabe, here on UCY.tv and the antimedia.org/radio. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm really happy to be back with you. A lot of stuff went on over the weekend that we're going to be talking about, from the domestic front, political front, elections, foreign policy. I mean, you name it. I mean, all kinds of things happening. We're going to try to decode and break through some of the stuff that's going on around the world tonight. And if you don't catch us tonight, if you can't, I know we're kind of late on the East Coast. So if you can't hear our show, you could always catch us on YouTube at UCY TV's YouTube channel. Listen to all of our shows. It's really important if you're a regular listener to kind of stay up on all the stuff we're following, because, we're talking about topics that have been playing out over a long period of time here, and every week, every day, there's new developments on certain topics and, certain angles of things that we've been talking about. And, me and DB have been going at this for a couple years now, and I hate to say it, but some of our predictions have become true, and maybe some of them just haven't had enough time to become true yet. And I hate to be right on a lot of this stuff, because some of these predictions aren't very good predictions, but sometimes we have some good predictions, and sometimes we're optimistic about what's going on, and there are definitely reasons to be optimistic. We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight as well, but first we're going to decode a bunch of these crazy news stuff. That being said, let me introduce my longtime co-host, DB Schwartz. What's up, DB?
Not much, Nick. Just trying to follow up on this accidental bombing that's now, apparently now they're admitting they hit the Syrian army. And if they're going to try to broker a no-fly zone and a ceasefire and then just go up and start bombing, to help ISIS basically overthrow Assad, well, then the ceasefire is over. So the proxy war is back on. But I don't know how many times you can do this back and forth before people just go, you know what? They're never, ever, ever going to hold up on their end of the bargain. Their word is as good as nothing. So I think we're at that point now. You were talking about it last time, Nick, about how it may take 10 or 20 years, but eventually the rest of the world's going to get tired of this bullshit. I don't even think it's going to take that long. I think it's on our doorstep, and it's just they've used distraction after distraction to keep the American people in the dark. They're not going to know until the bombs start dropping here that anything's going on.
Seriously, man. And you know what? There's a lot of people, too many, that just have no effing clue about what's going on in the world, because they unfortunately consume a lot of their information from CNN and Fox News and MSNBC, and there's a filter going on there, and they don't show you the full picture about what's going on in the world. I mean, we talk all the time about American exceptionalism and this illusion of American superiority. I mean, the mainstream media is very influential in maintaining that illusion. And so when you see reporting coming out of CNN and all these other mainstream news outlets, I mean, it comes through a lens of American exceptionalism, and America can never do wrong. We bomb places because we're bombing for good. And anyone else that does it, as long as they're not within NATO or part of our alliance, they're doing it for the wrong reasons, and we're doing it for the right reasons. And this is the narrative that comes out of the mainstream media, and it's so destructive because it's kind of like this, quote-unquote America First idea, where everything we do is good and it's just, and we're doing it for freedom and for democracy and for various other reasons that they cook up and tell us because it sounds good in their polling and all of their internal propaganda machinations, whatever you want to call it. They think that saying this kind of stuff and painting pictures in a certain light will make us feel more patriotic. And you know what? It works. I mean, look at the reaction from the Colin Kaepernick thing. I hate to bring up old news, but people were flipping in their graves because Colin Kaepernick didn't stand up for the national anthem. And then, a video just came out of a guy gunned down by the cops with his hands in the air in, I believe it was in Arizona this time. And it's just silence. Nobody gives a shit, so this really hardcore American exceptionalism, American nationalism, it's been hard-coded into our brains from the moment that we're old enough to start understanding what's being said on TV and in the newspapers and having the ability to read. You go to, public schooling and you're saying the Pledge of Allegiance every single day in class. We had one story on the anti-media from last week that we didn't get to talk about on our last show, but there's kids that are having their grades deducted at this point because they're not standing up for the national anthem or for the Pledge of Allegiance, in class. And this the Pledge of Allegiance is not mandatory. I mean, you have the freedom of speech supposedly in your class, in your public school, to not do the Pledge of Allegiance if you don't want to. Well, these kids, this example happened to be up in Washington somewhere, where this Native American student, refused to stand up for the pledge because she said, you know what, I'm not going to stand for the pledge because, America decimated my people, and, she had a pretty good reason for it. And her teacher took her grade down, from a 5 to a 3. I don't know what that equates to. I guess went from like an A to a C or something. And so this nationalism is really hard coded into us from the moment we are children to the, every single thing you watch on TV and every football game and every other nonsense that you see. Really either blatant or subtle nationalism, and it works so well that all these people are literally losing their shit over Colin Kaepernick, and the government gets away with financing war crimes in Yemen. This is something that we covered today on the anti-media as well. I mean, a little girl, a 10-year-old girl in Yemen put out a video trying to plead with the American people to get our government to stop bombing her country because she can't even go to school anymore or go do anything that regular people normally do because we've created a war zone out of our country, blown up schools, blown up hospitals, blowing up public spaces. Just today we found out that Saudi Arabia is using white phosphorus against civilians in Yemen. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that is war crimes. If anybody else was doing it, if Iran was doing it, if Russia was doing it, if Syria was doing it, I mean, we get reports from Syria that the Syrian government supposedly used white phosphorus, and everyone's like, oh my God, I can't believe the Syrian barbarians are using white phosphorus against their own people. Yet we give these weapons to Saudi Arabia, give them intelligence on where to use it in Yemen, no big deal. Gotta love, the nationalism works because we don't question that kind of stuff. But, we do question Colin Kaepernick, and anyway, we're going to get into more of this, what's going on in the Middle East, because it is really falling to shit right now. But first, let me introduce our awesome journalist, Jake Anderson. What's up, Jake?
Oh, not a whole lot. Just been battling trolls all day. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and those trolls are really could get under your skin if you let them.
Friendly trolls. Trolls you know are the worst.
It's, sometimes it's really sad. I've seen a couple people who I respect, that I don't really know them in personal life, but that I respect online and stuff. And I've seen them fall susceptible to this idea of Trump and also to this idea of lesser of two evilisms, and and using that as an excuse to vote for Clinton. And I've lost a lot of respect for people who I thought were open-minded and were kind of aware of what was going on with the two-party dog and pony show, or whatever you want to call it.
You sure they're not paid, bro?
I'm pretty sure they're not paid. I mean, at least not by the Hillary Clinton super PAC anyway. I think some people are just, I don't want to call them stupid, but they're susceptible to this groupthink, which is really what's been prevailing in the Hillary Clinton atmosphere. And so many people are stepping up to bat for Hillary Clinton at this point, just saying, you know what, I know she sucks, but it's not as bad as electing Trump. I mean, Robert Reich, which was a very prominent Bernie Sanders supporter, had an op-ed, I think, either today or yesterday, in Alternate, about...
He was threatened. They told him they were going to take away his Mini if he didn't go along with it.
His Mini?
One by one, they fall into line.
Yeah, and you know what? I've seen a lot of people that were former Bernie Sanders supporters that were just very disappointed with what he's been doing. I mean, it was one thing to endorse Hillary Clinton, and for a lot of people, that was like, okay, he's off his rocker, whatever. I still respect the guy, but he endorsed Hillary Clinton for whatever reason. Plenty of speculation as to why. But now he's like actively campaigning against third-party people.
Yeah.
And has really gotten people really upset. I mean, Jake, what do you make of that, dude?
Yeah, I mean, just the same thing as you just said. I'm not going to say I've lost all respect for him. I mean, I was never a, major burner, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, he's almost like reverse engineering his own movement now. I mean, he built this. I mean, there was an interview with my mom sent me a link of interview on Democracy Now! Of Ralph Nader talking about how Bernie Sanders built this incredible revolution, and now he's got all these people out there that are disillusioned and don't even know where to go, and it's like he's just reversing all the work he did by going along with the lesser of two evils logic and saying I know what a protest vote is. This is not the time for a protest vote. And it's like that's what they say in every single election ever. And it's not for a lot of us. It's not a protest vote. It's just literally like we're not going to vote for a war criminal, and we're not going to vote for an autocratic fascist. It's just
exactly.
It's
how dare you, Nick or Jake? I mean, that's the American way, dude. That's unpatriotic.
And Bernie Sanders, why he pisses me off right now is that he's getting really like up in our heads about it. It's psychological. Yeah, like you're right. Like he's not just going along and supporting Hillary Clinton. Now he's kind of really actively battling against third parties, and it's terrible. It's terrible.
And what really gets me, and this is what really hits the hypocrisy to a new level. And anybody that knows me and has been listening to the show knows that we all have kind of different opinions on the presidential race, and from different to different degrees. But I've never been a big fan of Bernie Sanders for various reasons. But I respected the guy because I felt like he was pretty principled, and he's been pretty consistent throughout his career, and I felt like he was lodging some pretty good criticisms at Hillary Clinton throughout the Democratic primary. But what's really hypocritical here is that Bernie Sanders himself is a product of a protest vote. I mean, Bernie Sanders is an independent. He's not a Democrat. He briefly switched to the Democratic Party so that he could run for the presidency and get access to everything that the mainstream parties get access to, which is pretty much very similar to what Ron Paul did in 2012, who back then is a guy I supported. And I understood that. I get it. at least in the current state of affairs, you have to change affiliations, run as a Democrat or Republican so that you can get access to the debates and to all this other stuff. But, Bernie Sanders is an independent. He briefly switched to become a Democrat to run for presidency. And now the news recently came out just a couple of months ago that once he officially stopped running for president, he switched his affiliation back to independent, and now he's an independent in the Senate. At the same time, he's sitting here telling you, hey, don't vote independent, guys. I mean, you're going to ruin Hillary Clinton's chances. I mean, that to me is just so hypocritical, especially considering the fact that Bernie Sanders proudly throughout his career has kind of used that independent status as something like, look, I'm an independent, guys. I'm not beholden to the Democrats or to the Republicans. And for that, that was pretty awesome. He's like the longest serving independent in the Senate ever, at least in modern politics. For him to be an independent now and say, oh, we can't vote independent for fear of handing the presidency over to Trump, that to me is just hypocritical. But not only that, it just doesn't make sense because, first of all, if the Democratic Party was this worried, and then now that the polls are like tightening up, there's like a mad scramble from the Democrats to try to court the independents. The other wild card here is Gary Johnson, who's getting way more support from progressives than anybody thought. I think that at the beginning, the political establishment kind of looked at Gary Johnson as a convenient way to beat Trump because they were like, by all common sense, it's like, okay, well, what we can do is get the people that are Republicans that aren't as extreme, that are not willing to vote for Trump. We can get them to vote for Johnson, split the Republican vote, and then that way Hillary Clinton can easily win. What nobody expected was the amount of appeal that Johnson was going to have with the progressives.
Oh, yeah.
A bunch of Bernie Sanders' former supporters are now supporting Gary Johnson. Nobody really expected that to happen.
I'm a progressive. I've never voted libertarian in my life. I would vote Johnson over Clinton. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, this phenomenon has really thrown a big wrench into what they thought was going to play out here, where they were going to go split the Republican vote using Gary Johnson. So, looking back a couple months ago, before this race started tightening up, even like just a month ago, the libertarians were getting like a lot of favorable press from typically, liberal media, CNN, and, a lot of these typically liberal establishment media types were giving a lot of airtime, a lot of press to Gary Johnson. And now all of a sudden these new polls are starting to show, oh shit, Johnson is pulling a bunch of support from Hillary Clinton and from Trump. Like he's pulling equally. Now you're seeing this mad attack against Gary Johnson, but more so just this huge push for millennials to hold their nose and vote for Hillary Clinton. And that's pretty much the message that Bernie Sanders is putting out there. He's like, look, you don't have to like Hillary Clinton, but you just have to dislike Donald Trump even worse. And unfortunately for the political establishment, millennials are a little bit more, or maybe a lot more idealistic than our parents and than the baby boomers. And we're not just going to be pushed over and say, oh yeah, you guys are right, let's just vote Hillary Clinton. Next election we'll do something about this. We don't want to kick the can down the road. Now, if the Democrats were serious about beating Trump, they wouldn't have got Clinton. They wouldn't have purposely undermined Bernie Sanders. They would have embraced Bernie Sanders, gave him a fair treatment, and he would have beat Hillary Clinton in all likelihood. And all the polls showed that Trump would lose to Bernie Sanders by a huge amount, like over 10%. And they all showed that with Trump and Clinton, it was always a pretty close race, just because Clinton and Trump are like almost equally unlikable. And so the Democrats, they were never actually concerned about beating Trump. They were more concerned with electing Hillary Clinton. They weren't so much concerned about beating Trump. It was more about Clinton than anything. And now these guys are in a mad scramble trying to figure out how they're going to get minorities and millennials to support Clinton. But she doesn't inspire anybody. In fact, Clinton's support with African Americans and with Latinos is quickly eroding. And not only that, but her enthusiasm with young people is literally like non-existent. Like nobody that is like under 35 is really on board this Hillary Clinton campaign. And so this is turning out to be a really, really interesting election. And you know what? The third parties, this is really the most support I think they've had in modern elections. The third parties are making major headway when it comes to the amount of support they're getting, and the 10% combined between Gary Johnson and Jill Stein of support throughout the country. That is a major milestone. I mean, we're looking at what could soon be a major shakeup of the political establishment. We've been talking about this throughout the last several months here on Anti-Media about how the Democratic Party is going into kamikaze mode and how Trump has been destroying the neoconservative establishment. But now we're starting to see the materialization of this. And it's actually happening. And maybe not next election, maybe not in 2 elections, but in 3 or 4 elections from now, we're going to see an entirely new landscape. I mean, what we're seeing right now is going to look foreign to us in a couple of elections, with the Republicans and Democrats completely dominating the entire political process. It's not going to be like that much longer, because the young people that are at voting age and everybody younger than voting age right now, they're not buying into this dog and pony show. The veil is lifted. The internet, thank God, the internet is a double-edged sword, but with this aspect, I think it's showing that the young people are finally seeing through this two-party bullshit, and no amount of prodding that can be done by Bernie Sanders or anybody in the media, I don't think any of them are going to be able to change this fact. I wanted to first go back to Jake and see what you think about this, because we've been kind of speculating about this on the show pretty much regularly, and this goes back to some of our predictions that we've been making. I mean, what do you think the future holds for this two-party system, the political establishment? Do you think do you think we're going to see a true shakeup, or is there going to be some kind of event that holds the establishment together? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I have to. A lot of my close friends are centrists and holding their noses, and I think their arms are getting tired from holding their nose, but they're still going to do it. Yeah, I think, and so I'm constantly having to hone and craft my argument, and at this point I'm just kind of just like, I don't care. I'm not voting for her. Go away. I'm not talking to you. I mean, that's kind of the point I've gotten to right now. But to answer your question, I think that there's never, if you go along with the lesser of two evils logic, there's never going to be a time to vote third party, ever. Every election they'd be like, we just can't let what's his name get into office. That's always going to be the logic. Conversely, this is probably the best time in history for a protest vote. We have 2 of the most disliked candidates in history at a time in which people are really starting to see past the veil, and a time at which a large third-party showing is, like you said, going to scare the shit out of the establishment. And, like you posted the other day, by all purposes, Gary Johnson should be in the debates. He's polling at 9% or 8% or the same amount that Ross Perot was polling at when he debated Clinton and Bush. And of course, the media is working along with them to not, have people consider it. They're constantly painting Jill Stein as for a while it was, Jill Stein is anti-vaxxer, she's a lunatic, you can't vote for her, and whatever you think about that issue, they're always coming up with these slogans. As for when I think it could change, I mean, I don't think the establishment is going to be going anywhere anytime soon. I think they're very good at camouflage. I think they're very good, like America itself they're very good at morphing in order to absorb movements. And I think the same people are going to keep controlling it for a while. They'll change the face of it. Yeah, the face is going to change dramatically in the next 10, 20 years for sure.
DB, I want to go back to you. I think you had a little connectivity issue. You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I wanted to get your opinion on this because you've been talking about how there's a good possibility of the political, the Republicans and the Democrats of their parties literally just like imploding from just the inner turmoil. going on. And now one thing I've noticed is that the neocon establishment, I think the Republican establishment has already completed a good portion of its morphing, because now, as you notice, a bunch of the neocons are now like in the Clinton camp, and so they've abandoned Trump, and so the Republican Party is already going through a reformation. But DB, what do you think is in store with the Democratic Party?
I honestly think there's going to be some kind of wholesale progressive movement for literally the entire millennial generation. I mean, they're basically just sick to death of not having the European lifestyle that we really do pay for, but instead goes to the military-industrial complex. I think a lot of people that are on the internet understand that $8.5 trillion is nearly half of our entire federal budget deficit that went missing, and it went to all black ops, and people that are on the internet know that stuff if they follow the rabbit hole down far enough. So you're going to have a split because everybody understands the Democratic Party is the neocon party. They've merged with the Republican Party. There's no difference anymore. So we need a true progressive party, not only to advance issues and get to a European quality of life for everyone, which we do deserve because we pay the taxes necessary for that now, but to actually stem or avoid a global conflict that could kill a lot of people. And that's a reality. That's not just something that could happen. When Hillary says we're going to fight Iran and Russia, and she's the presumptive nominee, even if they have to wheel her corpse into the Oval Office, they're going to make it happen. I mean, that's a draft. You have to get real. These are two superpowers we'd be fighting. It's not just some proxy war where we can fight them with mercenary groups. That's a full-on draft. So people have got to understand that.
Yeah, it's not Iraq where we just roll into the capital city in 3 weeks and it's over, and then it's just putting down a insurrection from there. It's literally a wide-scale major war that is going to require millions of bodies to be put in the way of the war machine, and that's what Hillary Clinton embodies, And the last point I want to make on these elections before we move into what's going on in Syria is just how pitiful this plea. I mean, they're begging people at this point to vote for Hillary Clinton. They're begging and pleading and using whatever emotional kind of attachment they could put on her to just scare people away from Trump. Not that Clinton is good, but that it's just emotionally irresponsible to not vote for Clinton, because then it's going to result in the election of Trump. And the most pitiful plea that I've seen was the recent one from Obama, where he was pleading to black people, saying, "Well, if you guys don't vote for Clinton, I'm actually going to be offended by that," And that to me is just going beyond. I mean, that crosses a line, dude.
Yeah, you're right, man. It's gotten really psychological and messed up what they're doing. Like, it just get over it. Like your shit's not working anymore. Just get over it. They're such a bunch of whiny crybabies. They have to have it their way and do everything that they want to do against the will of the people. And then they set up this situation and they come whining back to us saying, "Oh, you got to vote for us now." No. You need to listen to the people you're supposed to be representing and ruling, and stop being a bunch of crazy, insane fascists. I mean, that's all there is to it.
But that's how they got to those positions, though, Jake. I mean, that's who it attracts. That's who.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what the police force attracts. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
it's a position of power.
And this is tough love, and all of our reaction to it. The stubborn police and protesters stubbornly. This is a standoff right now. This is a standoff between. A large percentage of humans that don't like what's going on, and the people in control who want to keep it that way. And I don't know how it turns out.
So before we go, I lied a little bit there. Before we shift into what's going on in Syria, I have something to kind of segue us into that, because something election related, something foreign policy related here. As we all know, there was a couple of bombings, and there was an attack up there by you, DB, in Minnesota over the weekend, which have all been pretty much labeled terror attacks. I don't want to speculate too far about that, but We all know there was attacks that happened. People have been arrested. People have been killed. ISIS took credit for the one in Minnesota, though no one's yet to pull up any proof that it was actually ISIS or inspired by ISIS. Doesn't really matter. The point is that I wanted to get to is how Trump and Clinton have reacted to this situation. I wrote an article today on the anti-media, and I wish it would have gotten more reads. I put a lot of work into this article, but the title of it, if anyone listening wants to go and look at it while I'm talking about it, following weekend terror attacks, Trump and Clinton vow to increase terrorism. And that may seem like a crazy, outlandish headline, especially because both of these candidates claim to know what to do to stop terrorism and to stop it from spreading, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the point of the article is that both of these candidates, Trump and Clinton, have proposed policies in the past and have reiterated them following all these attacks that happened on the weekend, which will actually make the issue of terrorism even worse. And so first I talked about Donald Trump and mainly on his domestic policy, because Donald Trump has been so inconsistent on foreign policy that there's no way of telling exactly where he stands. I mean, there's been times where he was critical of U.S. intervention. There's other times where he's saying we need to go carpet bomb Iraq and take the oil. There's no way of telling exactly where he stands on foreign policy, but he's been much more consistent on domestic policy. And so I talked about Trump first because Trump's policies that he talks about, he said that he would ban Muslims from countries that have had a history of terrorism from entering the United States. He said he would add Muslims in the United States to a database to keep track of them. He said that we should profile Muslims and have strong police patrols in Muslim neighborhoods. And he's multiple times he's said that Islam hates America, and he basically more or less says Islam is our enemy. And so after the attack, Trump is coming out and he's saying, we got to get tough on Islam and we got to start profiling people and we got to start, putting patrols into Muslim neighborhoods. But here's the issue, and this was pointed out by Dan Sanchez over on Anti-War. Amazing thinker. He also periodically writes for the Anti-Media and other outlets. But the point is that the more Islamophobia spreads throughout the population and Muslims within the United States are blamed for terrorism, even though they're not terrorists, because 99.9% of Muslims are not terrorists, and most of them are moderate, and they don't want to hurt anybody, and they literally just want to be free and left alone. That's why they left the country that they came from, because they were being persecuted. But the more Islamophobia, the more we look at Muslims as the problem, the more that we distrust Muslims, the more we ban burqas, the more that we do anything like in that area of social engineering, the more we actually turn regular, moderate Muslim people towards the path of extremism. And so by this factor, I mean, Trump's ideas on getting tough on domestic Muslims here in the United States, his plan is actually going to create more and more and more domestic terrorism. And so Trump says he's tough on terrorism. The fact of the matter is he's going to make more domestic terrorists in the United States if he's elected and if he carries out his policies like he says he will. Now, on the other hand, Hillary Clinton also says she's going to take out ISIS and defeat terrorism, albeit in what she says is a smarter, more efficient way than Trump would. But the fact of the matter, her record and the stuff that she said basically tells a different story. What we know about Hillary Clinton is that she voted for the war in Iraq. The war in Iraq basically is what helped create ISIS. ISIS wouldn't even exist had we not overthrown Saddam Hussein. Prior to 2001, there was 0 suicide attacks in Iraq. Following 2001, there's been over 1,000 suicide attacks in Iraq. And so, Hillary Clinton voted for that, and she wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein, and we did, and it created a huge mess, and ISIS grew out of that mess. The other thing Hillary Clinton did is she supported the overthrow of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. There was a bunch of social engineering going on prior to 2011, which was, everyone remembers the Arab Spring uprising in the Middle East. Many people have speculated that was engineered by the U.S. and Western powers, and it was in many ways. Especially in Syria, where the United States had been planning since at least 2006 to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad. Hillary Clinton was one of those conspirators. She was planning on deposing Assad, and I quote from one of the emails that was released by WikiLeaks. One of Hillary Clinton's advisors wrote, "The best way to help Israel deal with Iran's growing nuclear capability is to help the people of Syria overthrow the regime of Bashar Assad." That's a quote from one of her advisors, from an email that we received from WikiLeaks. So, Hillary Clinton played a major part in pushing to finance and arm and train the opposition in Syria. Now, we all know how that turned out. The U.S. was hoping for a quick regime change, knock out Assad, get our puppet government in place, and then they could do our bidding. It would, on one hand, it would undermine Russia. On the other hand, it would help out our allies in Saudi Arabia and the other Sunni Gulf states to build their pipeline. Everybody, win-win situation for everybody except Russia. That was supposed to be a quick thing that would happen, and then everything was going to be fine, but it didn't. The plan to overthrow the Syrian government failed. Russia and other of their allies came to their assistance. Now it's turned into a protracted civil war, and now we've got about 4 million people dead. 10 million people have been displaced from their homes, and it's created a refugee crisis unseen since World War II. Hillary Clinton is partially responsible for this, and the vacuum in Syria that was created by all these policies to get rid of the Syrian government really created the perfect kind of petri dish for ISIS to really grow and build itself into this huge terror machine that it's really grown into. But it doesn't end there for Hillary Clinton. The other thing she did was she helped engineer the overthrow of Muammar al-Gaddafi, the president of Libya. And so this is pretty similar to what went on in Syria, except they actually were successful in getting rid of Gaddafi. But what happened in Libya is pretty similar to what happened in Iraq. They got rid of Gaddafi. They didn't have a legitimate plan for what would happen after we got rid of Gaddafi. The country fell into civil war, and now ISIS, other terror groups are thriving in Libya, creating another refugee crisis and creating the risk of terrorists slipping their way in with the refugees, and raising the risk of domestic terrorism. Now, the other thing, and this is where Hillary Clinton plays right into her past record, plays right into Trump's rhetoric. Clinton's policies throughout the Middle East of just very aggressive, hawkish regime change, overthrowing governments, sanctions, all the things needed to create instability in the Middle East, these policies created the refugee crisis. And now we all know that Trump is huge against the refugee crisis. He wants to ban Muslims from certain countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Hillary Clinton is one of the people that helped create the refugee crisis to begin with, and nobody gives her any credit for that. But it's because of her that partially because of her, a lot of this Islamophobia, anti-refugee sentiment is going around because of policies that she was in favor of, And so, these candidates are coming out now and saying, "Oh, look, I have the answers to fix, this terrorism issue, and if you elect me, you're all going to be safe." The actual reality is that if either of these candidates are elected, we're going to be less safe. There's going to be more terrorists at home from homegrown extremism because of Trump, and there's going to be more terrorists abroad because Clinton is so aggressive on foreign policy. And, in all likelihood, the next country, if Clinton is elected, to be toppled is going to be Iran. And that's going to create a whole bigger mess of extremism, unlike anything we've ever seen, because Iran is not Iraq. It's much, much, much more powerful than Iraq. And if you topple that government, forget about it.
You can't really topple Iran. If we go to a war with Iran, then all the oil from the Strait stops. So basically what you're doing with attacking Iran is you're basically destroying the global oil economy and doing a reset by force.
which would not be good, right? And Clinton is very reckless when it comes to Iran and Syria, and in particular in Russia. The Democrats have been doing nothing but painting Russia in a negative light. I mean, they blamed everything that they've been caught doing with the DNC leaks on Russia. And so, it's pretty clear that, like I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about the realignment of the political parties, the neocon establishment, which is famously in favor of war and extremely hawkish on foreign policy, they've realigned themselves with Hillary Clinton and the Democratic establishment. So, that being said, it's no surprise that Hillary Clinton is now the hawkish candidate, the muscular foreign policy candidate. And if she's elected, I mean, we can expect a huge increase in tensions with Russia. And keep in mind, tensions with Russia are already really, really high. And we're going to talk about that right now because, the Syrian ceasefire fell through and, a bunch of stuff happened. But long story short, both of these candidates are going to make the world a less safe place. And that's just another reason to not vote for either one of these clowns. Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, they're both clowns. They're both idiots. They're psychopaths. They're egotistical narcissists, whatever you want to call them. They're both bad for the United States. If you vote for either one of them, you're going to offend me. I don't care what Obama says that, if you don't vote for Clinton, he's going to be offended. If you vote for either one of those people, you're going to offend me, So that's all I have to say about that. DB, tell us what you know about what's going on in Syria, because, there was a ceasefire that was brokered between U.S. and Russia, and, there was supposed to be kind of a cessation of fighting over there, but that all changed over the weekend. Tell us what happened.
Just, from what I've seen, essentially they used the ceasefire as a way to use some of their new F-35 stealth editions that they thought they would be able to bring on radar-free and bomb some of the Syrian army regulars, especially their armored columns, and took them out and killed, I don't know, I think the death toll is over 100 now, and I know the injury toll is over another 100, so we're talking about some very heavy ordnance being dropped. And immediately after that, ISIS went on the offensive and trying to take back Aleppo. So, I mean, the chess pieces are falling in a really, really horrible position for basically anybody in the regular army over there is now fighting bloodthirsty mercenaries. These are not Islamists. These are, if anything, they're like Satanists or Luciferians. I mean, these guys are just straight diabolical, what they're doing over there. And people are trying to fight them like the Kurds, and the Kurds are getting it from the Turks for fighting this proxy army. And the proxy army, the only reason they even exist is just to take Assad down, get that pipeline rammed through, get everything set up for World War III so they can circumvent Russia's oil to Europe. I mean, that's really what it's all about if you just read into it. It's geopolitics.
And so Russia, after the bombing, called for an emergency UN Security Council meeting. And the Russian Foreign Ministry was quoted saying, "We are reaching a terrifying conclusion for the whole world, that the White House is defending the Islamic State. There can be no doubts about that." And the reason they said that, as you mentioned, DB, is that when this quote-unquote accidental bombing took place against the Syrian army, it was when they were fighting ISIS for a very strategic airbase that's up in the mountains there in Syria. And as soon as the U.S. got done bombing the shit out of these people, I believe there was something like 4 airstrikes that took place. Initial reports had the casualties at 80, and then over 80 dead, over 100 injured, and as you mentioned, the death toll has gone up since then. As soon as the bombing was over, ISIS went and took over the base. And so it's almost as if there was like coordination where the U.S. was like, okay, ISIS is we're gonna bomb these guys for you, and as soon as we're done bombing them, you go ahead and move in and take this base. And the way that they were kind of prepared to aggressively go and take this place over, it almost seemed like it was coordinated. And that's what Russia is saying, that now there's no questioning whether the U.S. is actually on the side of ISIS. Now, the problem is that the entire narrative from the United States tells us that we're actually in Syria not to fight against the Syrian government or Assad. It's that we're actually fighting against ISIS. And so there's a real conflict of narrative here from East and West, and I guess it's up to you who you want to believe, but I think both sides are probably telling a little bit of truth here. But another thing that is even more concerning, because as I mentioned earlier, and as everybody that's been listening to this show for a while knows, Russia is never, ever, ever going to abandon the Syrian government. I mean, Russia will fight for the Syrian government until it starts World War III. They're never going to abandon that government because, as DB mentioned, the moment the Syrian government falls, Russia will lose its pseudo-monopoly on the gas supplies to Europe, and Russia just literally will not let that happen. They'll go to any length to prevent that.
They will cease to exist as we know it if that pipeline gets built. You're right, Nick. They will turn the entire Middle East into glass through nuclear drops there if they have to, just to stop that, because that's all they got, man, is just natural gas and oil to Europe. Once you cut that off, they're done.
It's like their entire economy, and so Russia is not going to let that go, and the U.S. knows that, and they don't care. They're still prodding and prodding and prodding and prodding and doing what they can to get rid of the Syrian government, knowing damn well that Russia is going to act very rashly to protect the Syrian government, and that may be what they're trying to do. I mean, that's probably what the U.S. is trying to do, is to get Russia to overreact and do something really, really egregious to the point where, the global consensus is that Russia is committing war crimes and doing bad things, so the whole world gangs up on that. That obviously is what these guys are trying to do over there. But the U.S. is not being honest about its intentions. I mean, we're over there saying that we're fighting for democracy and that we're fighting for freedom and stuff like that. That's just not the case. I mean, it's not the case at all. I mean, if that were the case, what are we doing in Yemen with Saudi Arabia, who is doing the exact same thing that Assad is doing in Syria? I mean, they're propping up an unpopular government in Yemen. The U.S. is backing that operation, and we're helping Saudi Arabia bomb civilians and drop white phosphorus on people and bomb hospitals and bomb schools and all kinds of stuff like that. We're not over there supporting democracy and freedom, because if we were, we wouldn't be selling arms to Saudi Arabia and helping them do what they're doing all over the Middle East, because this whole narrative is completely false. We're not doing anything for freedom in the Middle East. In fact, I would argue that we're actually doing the opposite. We're fighting against popular uprisings in the Middle East, and so the U.S. has no moral standing to go over into Syria and say, hey, we're going to support democracy by arming up these radical Islamic rebels over here that are supposedly moderates. But do you guys see the video from last week where the U.S. Special Ops forces were chased out of a town in Syria by the Free Syrian Army? They were chased out. The U.S. guys, who we've been training and arming and financing the Free Syrian Army for a couple of years now. We got our special ops guys embedded in with them to help them be more effective at fighting the Syrian government. And they chased our guys out. I mean, there's video of them being chased out, and the Free Syrian Army guys are calling them all kinds of names and calling them traitors and calling them pigs and dogs and all kinds of shit. And our guys get chased out of there, and there's video to prove it. I mean, these are not democratic forces that we're supporting in Syria. They're extremists that are going to try to impose Sharia law, something that Americans supposedly hate. Right now in Syria, under the Syrian government, they don't have Sharia law. In fact, it's secular. In fact, before the Syrian uprising, there was like a huge Christian population and a Jewish population in Syria. Now they're all gone because they're getting killed by ISIS and by these rebels. I mean, these rebel groups are very, very orthodox people that are not tolerant to anybody outside of the Salafist movement, which is a very extreme perversion of Islam that is being pushed around the Middle East by Saudi Arabia and its allies. And most people will tell you that ISIS is not Muslim, and they're not practicing Islam. It's a perversion. It's like the KKK claiming to be Christian. But these are the guys. It's like if Russia was over here in the United States supporting the KKK because they're democratic and we're oppressive. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's what it really is comparable to. But that's what we're doing over there. And we've just bombed the Syrian army. But here's the thing. We claim that, we've now admitted, the United States has now admitted that, yeah, we did bomb those guys. We did bomb the Syrian army, but it was an accident. We didn't mean to do it. But what happens when there's an accident, when we accidentally bomb Russian troops, or we accidentally shoot down a Russian jet? Then what? And then all bets are off. Who knows what will happen from there? I mean, that's not a scenario that we need to be involved in ourselves with, and we need to get the hell out of the Syrian conflict. I mean, the United States being over there is literally a recipe for disaster. Trump being sloppy and being just unpredictable, and who knows what he'll do. It's a bad recipe for him, and for Clinton, who has shown a record and who has laid out a plan to deal with Syria. If she's elected, I mean, that's a guarantee of upping the tensions with Russia. Either one of these candidates, it's a bad scenario. So the only viable solution here is to get the United States out of Syria. We have no business being over there. If Saudi Arabia wants to fight, if Russia wants to fight, and these guys want to play it out for the resources over there, so be it. But the United States needs to stop lying and pretending that we're fighting for freedom and democracy in Syria, and just be honest and say, hey, look, we were trying to put in a pipeline. We tried to overthrow the Syrian government. It failed. We got to get out of here because it's turning into a big mess. If they were honest, that's what they do, but they're not honest. So they're going to keep on pretending. They're going to keep pretending they're fighting for a righteous cause over there, and there's no telling how bad the scenario is going to get over the next coming weeks, months, and years before maybe the U.S. public finally opens its eyes and says, you know what? We don't want World War III. We don't want our kids to be drafted to go fight Russia in a proxy war in Syria. We don't want that, so maybe it's time to pull back. Will the U.S. public wake up in time? I guess that's a really big question. Because you know what? I've been looking at the polls too, and again, it goes back to this trend of the younger people and how they're actually, first of all, they're anti-establishment. I just saw a poll that showed 50% of young people are actually supporting third-party candidates. So I mean, they're done with the two-party thing. But younger people are also very much anti-war. And I read this horrible propaganda piece over, I think it was on the Daily Beast or some crap rag like that was saying, well, the reason young people are anti-war or non-interventionalists is just they don't remember how bad the Soviets were, and they're too young to, they're too young to understand what's really going on. I think maybe the opposite is actually true. We're young enough to get our information from other sources that think maybe the United States doesn't have a role policing the entire world, and maybe that's a good thing. So, the young people, as much as apathetic as they are, and yeah, they love playing Pokemon and whatever, subtly they're anti-war. They're non-interventionists. They don't want to go over there and fight. Yeah, they like playing Black Ops and killing people online, but they don't want to kill people in real life. I mean, our generation is soft. They're not bloodthirsty. They don't want to go out and kill a bunch of commies and stuff like that. They want to be comfortable. They want to be at home and have internet and do their thing, and that's fine as long as we're not all around the world policing the world. That would be okay. But judging by the polls and stuff, the young people are kind of not really buying into this thing. And the other thing is that who is it that actually does the fighting? Well, it's not old guys. It's not the politicians. It's not rich people. It's young people. And so if young people are non-interventionalists, what does that tell you about the future of these wars? Are they going to be able to fool us with propaganda or by stirring up enough nationalistic fervor through the next terror attack or through the next something that Russia does or whatever happens in Syria? Are they going to be able to stir up enough nationalism where young Americans are finally going to put aside their Pokemon and put aside their cell phones and put aside their video games and say, yeah, give me a rifle, I'm going to go fight Russia? Or are we going to say, you know what? It just ain't worth it. We need to pull back. I mean, what's going to happen?
That's the reason for false flags. That's why they had to start doing them at the start of the century, for that exact reason. People are just going to have to admit it, and so that we can get some adequate investigations going on.
Yeah, dude, and that's the thing, is that something big needs to happen to stir up these young people to actually get them willing to fight. because the older generations, during the Cold War, they didn't second guess the propaganda, because it was so tightly controlled. I mean, the media conglomerates are more centralized now than they were then, but back then all there was newspapers and TV, and who could afford to produce video media? Nowadays, you got a cell phone, you got your own video media outlet. You could broadcast your video to anybody in the world. Back in the day, back in the 90s, 80s, in the 70s, how would you get yourself on TV or on video? You couldn't, unless you were a millionaire that had the resources to start your own TV channel. It just wouldn't happen. So the technology is really the saving grace here, where people can get their opinions out there and the media can get out there and spread different information other than this tightly controlled propaganda that comes from the mainstream. And so, as you said, various false flags in the past, I mean, going back to like the Gulf of Tonkin, that really gave the U.S. the go-ahead to start the Vietnam War, that was a false flag. That was, they said that a Vietnamese ship attacked the U.S. ship, and then they're like, okay, let's go ahead and start, on the offensive in Vietnam. Later on, we found out that never happened, and so Vietnam was based on a false flag. And Jake, you're right, man. I mean, what event is it going to take to get these apathetic young people that have been polled to be anti-war, non-interventionists, and just are generally anti-establishment? What is it going to take to get them to say, yeah, let's go America #1, let's go kill all these commies in Russia and China and this, that, and the other? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if a major event happened in the...
Only an invasion at this point, Nick. Even I can tell you up here that this stabbing that went on in St. Cloud, everybody that's like the older generation's like, oh my God, it's so close to home. Everybody that's younger is like, that's just a false flag to get us against the Somali community. We're not going to fall for this bullshit. If it was just one psychopath, then so be it. He was shot and killed by an off-duty cop that was concealed carrying, and up here that's legal with a license. And you know what it did? If they were trying to get a false flag to make people against the Somali and the Muslim communities, what they did instead was, now the talk is, you know what? We need to get a concealed carry license. We need to be carrying at all times to shoot these psychopaths, not the opposite. We're not going to go cowering to the cops because they're ineffectual. Just so happened to be this guy was there. But I mean, if he wasn't, you have an entirely disarmed population of basically wusses. You're right, Nick. We're the softest country, and if we didn't have our tech, we would be screwed.
And again, this guy went on a mass knifing attack up there in Minnesota. Only one person died, right?
A mass knifing, Nick. If I saw someone knife someone, I would just strangle him. I mean, he gets one hit on someone, and then you tackle him and kill him. I mean, it's a knife, dude, but this is where we're at in society. The GI generation's just got to be like, oh my God, we're screwed if we get invaded.
But the point I wanted to make was that there's only one casualty because there was actually someone there that had the ability to do something about it, and it wasn't waiting around for 20 minutes for the cops to show up. And then when the cops if you look at what happened in Orlando and look at what happened in Dallas, if you're dealing with the guy who the cops think is actually someone who knows how to use their weapon, the cops are going to sit around for hours and hours and sitting there trying to develop some kind of strategy.
They're going to wait for the robot to come blow them up.
Exactly. And
They scheduled the training exercise that was going on concurrently a little too close to the thing, so they got there quicker.
But this guy in Minnesota, he wasn't an on-duty cop. He happened to be a cop, but he was a guy with a concealed carry weapon, and he was able to stop this thing before this guy was able to massacre a bunch of people. Only one person died because there was someone there trained in self-defense. That's a lesson to be learned. Thank you all for tuning in to the Anti-Media Radio. Peace out.
I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo.